Ronald Reagan. You either love him or hate him. There's really no middle ground. It's kind of like you're either like this lady right here, and look where that gets you, or maybe you're more like this guy here. Bro, that punch wasn't even close. Either way, you got to admit Ronald Reagan had a huge influence on the movies that were made while he was president. Movies were in Reagan's DNA. The kinds of movies with white picket fences, with clearly defined good guys and bad guys, and a strong sense of law and order. For a lot of folks, the 1950s represented that sort of paradise. You could get a good job with just a high school diploma, and a little hard work could secure a better future. There was a strong sense of respect for the past, for authority, and an unwavering belief in a bright future. Then came the 1960s. Assassinations, war, pain, anger, upheaval, a loss of innocence. At the dawn of the Reagan era, a lot of folks saw that perfect life drifting away, and they wanted to get back to the 1950s, to restore our innocence, and to restore our country's strength and glory. So let's take a look at the movies of the Reagan era and consider how realistic they were. Yeah, not really very, not at all. Why not? Well, let's take one Reagan era favorite, Red Dawn from 1984. In it, we see a bunch of high school kids from, I don't know, Wyoming or some shit, take down the entire Soviet army in a show of can-do spirit that would make even the Gipper himself shed a single red, white, and blue tear. The evolution of certain characters is also telling. Like in 1976, Rocky Balboa was a hard-working, blue-collar hero. He's eating raw eggs, he's climbing stairs, he's punching meat. But by Rocky IV, in the heart of the Reagan era, he's a lubed-up, jacked-up, commie-punching machine. And he's a stand-in for the entire United States during the Cold War. The plucky underdog standing up to the unstoppable Ivan Drago.
I must break you.
And you know damn well he was not going to get broken, because the Reagan era needed to restore our power and our glory, our manhood even. Stallone's other most famous character is John Rambo, and he starts his on-screen life in 1982 as a drifter, a troubled Vietnam vet who really just wants to be left alone. But by Rambo First Blood Part 2, which is just 3 years later, Rambo pretty much single-handedly wins Vietnam II Electric Boogaloo. And then he's all,
mission accomplished.
The guy's like a 4-hour erection personified. There's also the future business leaders of America favorite, Risky Business. It's the heartwarming story of a handsome young entrepreneur played by Tom Cruise, and he sets up a highly successful and lucrative prostitution ring in his family home. His reward for slinging flesh to a bunch of underage kids? A one-way ticket to prison. Oh, no, I'm sorry, I misread that. That says Princeton.
What a capitalist.
Something deregulation, am I right? Yeah, this guy gets it. In Field of Dreams, you can wish your greatest dreams into existence. And of course, that's possible because things used to be way better than they are now. Strangely, the actual message of Field of Dreams is that the idealism of the 1960s was scary and bad, and that only a return to simpler times can save the family farm. Everywhere you looked in the 1980s, movies seemed to be saying, look where we're headed if we don't get back to the past. It makes sense, too. These kids that grew up watching Leave It to Beaver, Andy Griffith, Donna Reed, The Adventures of Superman, and The Lone Ranger, they must have felt comforted by the huge increase in nostalgic movies during the 80s that ignored real-world problems and showed them exactly what they wanted to see. Good guys in white, bad guys in black, trusty minority sidekicks, dutiful women. The Reagan era actually predates his presidency by several years, back when he had risen to national prominence politically. The first movie to really catch hold of that ultra-nostalgic feel was 1973's American Graffiti, directed by George Lucas. The appetite for the innocence of the 1950s was strong in the shadow of the Vietnam War and Watergate, the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Dr. Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, and Malcolm X, women's agency over their own reproductive cycle, and the civil rights movement. For people who felt threatened by those changes, American Graffiti provided a sweet relief from the real world. The movie is set 11 years before its release date. Can you imagine that? I'm making this video in 2020, and nobody I know of would be thinking back on the innocence lost since 2009. Actually, now that I think about it, maybe. But for these young adults who had been through so much in so few years, Modesto, California in 1962 might as well have been a century ago on another planet. American Graffiti is a coming-of-age story and a reality tour of what made the 50s and early 60s worth living a second time. From the non-stop hit spinning of Wolfman Jack to the innocent hijinks of buying booze underage, American Graffiti presents a whitewashed version of real life. Fast cars, tasty burgers, cute girls who just might fall in love with you at a stoplight. Dude, she's way out of your league. Kennedy was still in the White House, nobody was worried about Vietnam, there was no AIDS pandemic, everybody had a good job, you could buy a sack of hamburgers for a nickel or some shit, so everything was fine. The culmination of the entire movie, Harrison Ford's character Bob Falfa has wrecked his 1955 Chevy into a field. As it bursts into flames, it's symbolic of the end of an era. Or symbolic of the beginning of the 1960s, which the Reagan era seemed to blame for all the problems we faced in the 80s. Back to the Future came out July 3rd, 1985. You know the story by now. Back to the Future is the story of Marty McFly, who's transported from 1985 to 1955 in a time machine his buddy Doc Brown made out of a DeLorean.
Are you telling me that you built a time machine out of a DeLorean?
I just said that. Like, I literally just said that. He meets his parents. His dad, George, is something of a loser, but hey, even the 50s weren't perfect. And his mom, Lorraine, has the hots for him, which is uncomfortable at best. When Marty finds himself in 1955, he sees an idealized world. He gets to see just how badly things have gone downhill over the last 30 years. Probably the most famous line in Back to the Future is this one.
Who's president of the United States in 1985?
Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan, the actor?
Reagan loved Back to the Future. When he first saw that line delivered, he actually made the projectionist stop the movie and rewind it so he could hear it again. He even quoted Back to the Future in the 1986 State of the Union address. It had everything. Good guys and bad guys. Changing history and the future. Pure movie magic. And pure Reagan-era bullshit. But when you think about it, Marty isn't actually the one who saves the future, it's George. After he's basically given up on his
Daddy-o.
He concocts a harebrained scheme to sexually assault his own mother to force George to stand up for her. Yeah, that shit got pretty dark. The scheme goes wrong, but George finally does decide to stand up for himself, to channel his inner Ronald Reagan, and to sock Biff in the face, winning Lorraine's love forever. When Marty returns home, the world has changed. It's as if Marty didn't really change the future as much as he brought some of good old 1955 back with him, and that's actually what saved the day. And since Lorraine was a girl of the 50s, even her life is better, thanks to her relationship with the new and improved George. In Back to the Future, the 50s are a time where, if you set your mind to it, you can change your future and even score a sweet Toyota pickup truck in the process.
Great Scott!
Yeah, it is pretty great. Plus, as an added bonus, you can create an entire musical genre to help out a poor black musician who's fresh out of ideas. Nostalgia is a hell of a drug. 1984's blockbuster hit Ghostbusters doesn't really have the nostalgia of many of the other movies on this list, but the effects of the movie's remake is telling.
The effect? I'll tell you what the effect is! It's pissing me off!
Yeah, a lot of people felt that way. But if Ghostbusters didn't have that same powerful pull back to the 1950s like American Graffiti and Back to the Future, the Reaganomics-friendly theme is right on point. Ghostbusters tells the story of a group of men who are rudely thrown out of the stuffy, no-fun university where they worked, and they manage to bootstrap themselves, overcoming the aggressive and needless actions by the overbearing and, dare I say, evil Environmental Protection Agency. The famously dickless Walter Peck, his reckless actions only make things worse, and soon the entire city is threatened by spooky specters and pesky poltergeists. The message is really clear. Business saves the day. The useless Poindexters at that stupid old university could only hold our boys down for so long. At best of all, there's a token black guy, so you don't have to feel too guilty, and there's a beautiful lady-shaped trophy to be won along the way. It's a real win-win, I guess is what I'm saying. So there is some part of Ghostbusters that called for that simpler time when women were objects to be won and you couldn't be a bad guy because you had a black friend. But the real nostalgia is shown in the backlash against the Ghostbusters reboot. It's not strictly that the movie isn't funny, which it kinda isn't, or that it was a needless remake of a pretty good movie, which it was, but that it takes the "No Girls Allowed" sign off the clubhouse door. It's just not Reagan-y enough. When we open a time capsule that was 1984, it shows us how far we've come and how much we've changed. And for some viewers, that's a little scary.
I'm terrified beyond the capacity for rational thought.
Of course, not all movies fit perfectly into the Reagan-era messaging. In fact, there are quite a few subversive movies from later in the 80s that are really cool and have really valuable messages. But a lot of these movies were either ignored or completely misinterpreted. They Live is a movie that wasn't so much ignored or misinterpreted as it was just dismissed. At least not originally. But we'll get back to that in a minute. It didn't perform very well at the box office, to be honest, and people sort of wrote it off as just another dumb action flick. And why? Well, maybe the next sentence will shed some light on that. Professional wrestler Rowdy Roddy Piper plays John Nada, an unemployed drifter who stumbles upon a rebellion against yuppie alien invaders. When Nada finds a box of magical sunglasses that allow him to see the world as it really is, what he sees is pretty f***ed up. It's a corporate wasteland of hidden messages to keep people complacent, to make us consume and obey. There's a massive inequality of wealth, there's drones flying overhead spying on us, and all around us, aliens lurk. Average rich assholes, the police, the media, even our politicians. They're aliens and they're here to be a bunch of dicks. It seems like everywhere Nada looks, these aliens are walking among us. And they look, well, I don't know, how would you describe them, John?
You know, you look like your head fell on the cheese dip back in 1957.
Ouch. Well, how about that other lady?
You're okay. This one, real ugly.
Yeah, okay, harsh but fair. Oh, and if you like fight scenes, you really have to check out They Live. It's got an absolute classic between Piper and his construction worker friend played by Keith David. Piper wants David to put on the sunglasses to see the world as it really is.
Either put on these glasses or start eating that trash can.
David resists.
Not this year.
It's hilarious at times, it's brutal most of the time, and when you think of it as a metaphor for how hard it is to make some people wake up to an uncomfortable truth, it's got a really great message. Maybe nobody gets that. Maybe that's why audiences dismissed it as kind of a simple action, not the critique of the police state, of corporate overlords, and of all the things director John Carpenter has said the movie is about. Who knows? But lately, They Live has also had its message completely hijacked. Holocaust deniers, neo-Nazis, and other assorted nuts in the alt-right bowl have tortured the original meaning into an anti-Semitic conspiracy. I mean, it is one of Alex Jones's favorite movies, so yeah. Piper himself once said, They Live is kind of the Cliff's Notes of what's going on. And as always, what's going on is in the eye of the audience. I think I'll stick with Carpenter's statement that They Live is about yuppies and unrestrained capitalism. It has nothing to do with Jewish control of the world, which is slander and a lie. That should pretty much be case closed, but one of the powers of Reaganism is to reject reality if it doesn't fit the narrative you want to create for yourself. After all, if you can change the future, why not change meaning? Another great example of a movie that's totally misinterpreted is 1987's Wall Street by Oliver Stone. Stone believes the movie is about corporate greed destroying lives, about the excesses of the Reagan era, and about selfishness, about moral and ethical bankruptcy. But when Gordon Gekko, played by Michael Douglas in an Academy Award-winning role, says,
The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works.
What a generation of would-be Bud Foxes heard was, greed is good. And that's how they remember that line, and that's how they still quote it. And they took the message to heart. Wall Street motivated thousands of Gordon Gekko stans to get into the cutthroat world of finance, to do exactly what the movie warns you is a pretty shitty thing to do.
What an asshole, man. That's a shame.
1987's RoboCop also sailed over the heads of a lot of the audience. It's a satire. It's a brutal portrayal that warns against the privatization of critical government functions and also warns of corporate greed. But a lot of viewers just saw a badass mecha cop cleaning up the streets caused by the moral decay in the big cities. RoboCop was seen as a sort of throwback to 1950s Western TV shows that a lot of viewers had grown up watching. The good guy with the gun kills the bad guys with the gun. That's the only message they wanted, and that's what they heard.
Nick, I'm very disappointed.
So, where does that leave us? And why do I care anyway? Ultimately, there's nothing wrong with nostalgia, and a lot of the movies I've talked about are favorites of mine. Movies I saw when I was a kid. For me and a lot of other Gen Xers, these movies are comfort food. I suppose if Gen X were a little bit bigger, we might see nostalgic movies pining for the good old days of the Atari 2600 and riding dirt bikes without a helmet. And we might look forward to the upcoming State of the Union address by President Molly Ringwald, with Vice President Chunk from the Goonies watching from the wings. But if Gen X had more of an appetite for rewinding the 80s, I'd expect those movies to show a little bit more balance. And yeah, I get it, they're movies. They're movies about time travel and busting ghosts. I'm down to suspend disbelief and strap in for some fun entertainment. I don't have a problem with most movies of the Reagan era, I just think you need to tell the full story. The 1950s were not idyllic, they weren't perfect. Just like the 1980s weren't perfect. There was racism, sexism, poverty, unrest, unhappiness, income and wealth gaps, disease, hate, division, cats and dogs living together. They're all still with us, just like they've always been with us, and like they probably always will be. But self-mythologizing is dangerous. It prevents us from learning and growing. And you know, the Reagan era never really ended. We're still living in it today. Instead of a B-list movie star, we've got a B-list reality TV star in the White House. We're still fighting the same culture wars. We're still on the same desperate quest to satisfy a hunger, to scratch an itch or fill some hole in us. But we'll never fill it. We'll never relive the past. That's impossible. Change isn't bad, it's inevitable. The nostalgia of the 50s was weaponized. The optimism was unrealistic. The history it told was revisionist. There was greed and toxic individualism. Nothing was connected to reality because the reality on display had been established in the 1950s, and it wasn't even realistic back then. The mythology presents a time and a place that can't be lived up to because that time and place never existed. But if we address the problems we have today, if storytellers are honest and we read and watch with a critical eye, maybe we can come to a better understanding of what this country and really the entire world is going through. What we've always been going through.
If you have a windmill anywhere near your house, congratulations.
And we can keep trying to see the world as it really is.
And they say the noise causes cancer. You tell me that one, okay? You know, the thing makes it so... And of course, it's like a graveyard for birds.
Hey, if you like this video, I'd really love it if you'd hit like, subscribe, maybe leave a comment below. I've got a bunch of other cool stuff coming up. And if you like this, I think you'll like what I've got to do next. I don't know what I'm saying. Anyway, thanks for watching.